Hi, welcome to a 14-day weather forecast. I was talking to a British gas engineer yesterday who told me that there are quite a number of people yet to switch on their central heating this autumn. And it doesn't actually surprise me because it has often been very mild indeed in recent weeks. It doesn't feel at all like a bonfire night, at least it doesn't to me. But can we expect a change as we head through the coming days? Let's see. Now, here is the picture at 18 GMT on Tuesday the 4th of November. Mischievous night, as it was known to me as a kid growing up in Yorkshire a long time ago. And the reason why it's so mild is because we've got a southwesterly flow moving up across all areas, and that's bringing outbreaks of rain, but mostly to western and northern parts of the United Kingdom, and that continues to be the case in the short term. Some heavy rain in the north and west, it could cause problems, but central and eastern counties often a good deal drier. Then as we head into the weekend, it's quite a messy picture, but there are indications of drier periods developing more widely. But still, disturbances are threatening from the Atlantic. Running this through to conclusion, it stays quite changeable. Further patchy spells of rain, some heavy ones, mostly in the north and west still. And then towards the end of the period, it's quite a messy pattern which is developing. Low pressure centred here to the southwest. A southeasterly flow, there are some patchy outbreaks of rain in places, but also dry periods. Here's the jet stream and upper air temperature sequence associated with the same computer model run. The UK is inside the red circle, and the oranges there over central and southern counties indicate warm air aloft. Of course, on these sequences, it's the blues and purples which are used to indicate cold air, and they are a long way to our north. Will that change as I run the sequence? Well, the yellows and oranges do get shunted away, greens return, and for some indications there of the blues making southwards progress to the northeast of the UK. But the message here is that we lose a very warm air aloft through the first few days, and towards the end of the first week, temperatures at this level, about 1,500 metres above our heads, become closer to the long-term norm. What does all that mean though in terms of the day-to-day weather which we can expect? Let's see using some of the UKV charts. Wednesday afternoon, temperatures on the left, and it's a very mild, exceptionally so, in the southern half of the UK, with values up to about 17 or even 18 Celsius. Even in the north, 10 or 11 in much of northern Scotland, just a little bit cooler, of course, over the Highlands. There is some rain around as well, mostly in the west and the north. It's pushing northwards through the day, drier periods falling behind it and staying dry for much of the time actually in central and eastern England. So if you are planning fireworks, take a look at the radar because there is that chance of rain in places, but also I think you may be quite lucky in much of the UK. I'm not sure if I would describe it as lucky with temperatures like this because, as I say, to my mind it doesn't feel like bonfire night should, and it will also be quite breezy, but you may be able to get those fireworks away. Forwards to Thursday. If anything, temperatures are now a little bit higher. They've climbed up maybe another degree or so, and in the north as well, it's very mild indeed. There is some rain around, mostly in the west and the north. You can see it heading northeastwards there through the day, but also, if you look closely, this at least is suggesting there should be a reasonable amount of cloud breaks, so sunny spells developing. So if you catch the sunshine, it will feel probably quite spring-like. That's maybe the best way to describe it. The picture on Friday, not much has changed. It's still very mild, at least according to this temperature, it's maybe a degree or so lower, but way above the average for time of the year. There are outbreaks of rainbow pushing northeastwards up from the southwest, and they initially are heavy, but they're tending to fragment as they make their way. By Saturday, temperatures have dipped a little bit, but still above the norm. We're about 13 to 15 in the southern half of the UK, about 8 to 12 in the north, and there are some patchy outbreaks of rain, but the chance of dry periods through this part of the forecast period is increasing. So the rain's quite patchy, and there's quite a lot of sunshine breaking through there according to this computer model run, but Whether or not that will be the case, I think will be the case is a little bit debatable. There is a tendency at times a computer model runs to overestimate the extent of cloud breaks. So it will feel very pleasant if the sun shines, but don't rely on it at the weekend. Sunday and Monday, using data from the GFS model, temperatures perhaps just trending downwards a little at this point, as I mentioned. We're losing that very, very warm air aloft, but still between 11 to 14 in southern and central areas and double figures in the north. By Monday, perhaps another degree or so lower, but it's mild. And talking of mild, just to keep the theme going, these are the overnight lows for Tuesday night into Wednesday, Wednesday into Thursday, and Friday into Saturday, and they are truly exceptional. I don't know if there are any stats gurus watching this, and I'm not sure how close they are to being record breaking, but overnight lows are between 13 and 15 degrees, shown on the first two charts there, are very, very noteworthy for the time of year. I think if it was July and you knew the temperature wasn't going to fall below 15 degrees overnight, that would seem quite reasonable. But for this to happen in November, I think must be close to pushing some records. On the right though, temperatures have dipped a little bit, so now we're only falling to 12 or 13 in central and eastern counties, and single figures is possible in Wales and the southwest and the north, 8s, 9s and 10s. Distinctly Arctic-like. Perhaps not. Is it going to be a very windy? Quite windy at times, but I don't think winds are going to be causing trouble through the first week. This shows a forecast gusts from Mogreb's G ensemble for London. There is something of a scatter later on, but still values are ranging from between maybe about 5 miles an hour up to about 30 miles an hour. So I don't think that's going to be an issue, at least in the southeast. Is it going to be an issue as we head northwards? Here's the comparable chart for Aberdeen. It is windier, but I don't think winds here are going to cause a problem either. There's just one run around the 8th of November which is going up to 40 miles an hour, but even that isn't particularly threatening, especially not for the northern half of the UK where stronger winds are more common. Pressure will be rising through the first week. This is the mean surface level pressure graph for Birmingham using the Mogreb's G data. So dipping a little bit in the short term for the first couple of days, actually from about 1,010 down to about 1,000. But then through the second half of the week, we're going up to around about 1,020. And there's quite good agreement there. The individual runs, each represented by a different line on this graph, are staying fairly close together. The trend is quite clear. It's only towards the very end there, between the 10th and the 12th of November, so beyond the end of the first week, that the scatter increases notably. Rainfall. These are the forecast totals for the first 5 days based on data from the ECM and GFS models. Significant amounts of rain in the west and the northwest, but it's much drier in central and eastern counties. In fact, my pond has almost dried out once more, so despite this unsettled pattern which we've had recently, it really has been the west and the north where significant amounts of rain have been recorded. It has stayed a lot drier for much of the time as you head further eastwards and southeastwards. The 10-day charts show that totals have increased a little bit, but values are still low actually in central and eastern counties of England, and they haven't increased that much elsewhere either. So probably quite a lot of dry weather between days 5 and days 10 if these are to be believed. So therefore, in more general terms, how do the deterministic models compare with each other as we head towards the end of the first week? Here is the GFS on Tuesday the 11th of November. Low pressure ascended to the west and high pressure is now showing signs of building to the north, so maybe a change is afoot, as I've been hinting. The Canadian model, similar. The German icon, the European, the artificial intelligence version of the European, and finally the UK Met Office Global. Interesting developments to the North UK with high pressure building at this point. I think the message here is that towards the end of the first week there are signs of a more amplified pattern developing across the North Atlantic, and if that happens, the chance of colder spells further down the line would be increasing, but it's a very long way off and it's all quite messy at this point at least. So let's see how things may develop therefore through the second week using the ensemble data to try and identify the general trends and probabilities. Do they back up that amplified pattern which is starting to show its hand on the deterministic models by the end of the first week? Well, here's the 16-day GEFS plot for London. Upper air temperatures across the top are, at least according to the ensemble mean, staying a little bit above the 30-year norm. The big anomaly which is present for the first few days of the first week has gone. Nonetheless, the thick purple line staying above the thick black line means that when all the runs are averaged out, that mean is above the 30-year average, so it doesn't look particularly cold. Are there a number of cold runs in the pack later? Well, there are quite a few runs which are dipping down to around -5 Celsius at the 850 HPA level, so it's rather cold, but it doesn't look at this stage that many or any even of those runs are bringing in cold air and keeping it in place. But temperatures at this level are not the be-all and end-all with the very short days which we now have at this time of the year. In terms of rain, well, there's an ongoing risk of rain. Maybe the number of spikes increases at the start of the second week and then decreases again later on. So I would expect there to be a reasonable amount of dry periods through the second week, but some rain at least in the southeast. But based on developments recently, I don't think the amounts of rain would be very great. Now, the artificial intelligence version of the European ensemble model, well, if anything here, the anomaly is a little bit more marked. At the 850 HPA level, the thick purple line is further above the thick black line. The scale on the vertical axis is a little bit different to the GEFS plots, but nonetheless it does look as though, even taking that into account, that the anomaly is somewhat bigger. But there are a few runs which bring cold air across this part of the UK and keep it in place for several days at least. You can see the thick blue line towards the end there, which is the control run in the model, and there are one or two others earlier on which are dipping down to that level and staying there for a few days at least. But there are more runs in the European ensemble models, both the artificial intelligence version and the physics-based one, so there's a greater chance, of course, of something like that turning up. All in all, though, the message is that temperatures at the 850 HPA level are staying above the average. But as I said, it's not the be-all and end-all. So here are the 2-meter temperature data tables for London using the GEFS data. Initially, the daytime maximums are mostly made up from the yellow shading, runs going for between 11 and 15. There is, though, a clear downwards trend. By the end of the second week, it's mainly light green, so not desperately cold through the days by any means, if this is right. Maximums are between 6 and 10 in the London area, but the trend is downwards, which would suggest that maybe we're going to be seeing high pressure coming into play, particularly later on. The overnight lows, lots of light green there through the first few days and really through the week as a whole, but the amount of dark green does start to increase. Those are runs which are cold enough for ground frost, and as I've pointed out before, if you jump out of London, you would expect those values to be a little bit lower away from the urban heat island. But the trends are the important thing here. Up to Manchester, slightly above the average there at the 850 HPA level, but not much of an anomaly at all, actually. The risk of rain is ongoing, quite a few spikes, so it certainly doesn't suggest that high pressure is going to be asserting itself too strongly, at least not through most of the second week. The 2-meter temperatures for Manchester, the daytime maximums, mostly light greens, the nighttime lows, mostly light greens to start off with, and then the dark greens increase in their number later on. So probably fairly closer to the average than it has been recently, or at least that it will be through the first week. But this doesn't look desperately cold by any means. Up to Glasgow, fluctuating around the average at the 850 HPA level, and it's still a wet picture up here. I think maybe very wet stretching it, but certainly there's an ongoing risk of rain and there's some quite big spikes in there. So I'd say a lower chance of drier conditions in the northwest of the UK. And that would tend to fit in with the idea that high pressure may be building to the east or to the northeast, and disturbances from the Atlantic are still pushing into northwestern areas. In terms of snow, just a quick mention of the snow row along the bottom there. The maximum value it reaches is 1. It can go up to 33, and it's used to show how many runs in the ensemble are forecasting snow to fall at the given time. It doesn't relate to snow accumulating, and as I've mentioned many times, it could just be a few flakes of snow mixed into a heavy burst of rain. Although with a maximum value of 1, that discussion is a little bit academic. The 2-metre temperature data tables for Glasgow, a slight trend downwards, but even towards the end there, it's the light greens which are dominating through the days. The nighttime lows are lower than Manchester and London, and there's a chance there of air frost later on, but fairly average. I mean, we're looking into the middle part of November here, so there's nothing at all out of the ordinary showing up. Rainfall through the second week. These charts are generated from the ECM ensemble. They show the percentage chance of 5 or more millimetres of rainfall on a given day, and they represent the first 3 days of week 2. The greatest chance of significant rain is in the west, where it's between 30 and 50 or maybe 60%, lower by day 3, and generally a significantly lower risk of rain in central and eastern areas. The same general pattern continues through the next 3 days. Wettest in the northwest would probably be the message here. It's quite interesting to see the third chart showing an increase in the chance of significant amounts of rain more widely, but at this range it's just about the general trend, so that could be something of an anomaly given the days before it. And the mean surface level pressure data table for York indicates that high pressure may well be having more influence through the second week. There's quite a lot of yellow in these columns, and there's an increasing amount of orange. The orange is used to show runs which are going for between 1026 to 1040 millibars, so strongly high pressure dominated. But early on at least, there's some blue still showing up in the columns and a little bit of purple. The blues are deep areas of low pressure, but with that amount in the columns, it indicates that it's only a minority of runs which are going for that type of scenario. And later on, as I say, high pressure looks like it's going to be becoming more influential. It's not a certainty. There's still a fair amount of green, or the green is in a minority, but it's still not insignificant even towards the end there. So the message is that pressure will probably be building somewhere close to the UK, maybe to the north. So that is something to keep an eye on, but it doesn't look as though high pressure is going to necessarily be completely dominant. Here's the GEFS mean surface level pressure snapshot chart for Friday the 14th of November, and it just ties in with the idea that it's quite a messy and difficult picture to pin down. Here's the UK, 1010 millibars is the average mean surface level pressure just for south there. It looks like we've got low pressure to the west, high pressure to the east. Maybe that high pressure could be to the north or to the northeast. It could be sinking southwards, as is often the case, but a messy picture. And it's the same story with the European mean surface level pressure snapshot chart for the same time. This would tend to indicate that high pressure may well be sinking southeastwards and not becoming dominant to the north of the United Kingdom. So it's quite a nondescript scenario at this point. So to summarise, week 1, changeable with significant amounts of rain in the north and the west, but it will often be drier in the east, and the chance of dry periods probably increases more widely later on. Very mild, in fact for nights exceptionally so, although towards the end temperatures will be dipping a little. Week 2, dry periods, but the risk of rain at times remains. After a mild start, temperatures dip and the chance of frost and fog may begin to increase. So there we have it. Mild or very mild through the first week, perhaps turning cooler through the second. I think there is quite a lot of uncertainty about the second week. It was very difficult to try and focus in on a particular direction of travel on this update. It does look as though high pressure will be having more influence, at least for a time, and that opens the gate to the possibility of colder weather developing, but there isn't really anything particularly cold yet showing up in the models. It's just something to keep an eye on as we head towards and through the middle part of November. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. And as ever, if you did, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel if you've not done so already, because in that way you'll not be missing any of my future updates. Also, stay up to date with the day-to-day developments by checking out the weatheroutlook.com website. Thanks very much now. Bye.